Everyday me, everyday God. Sacred spaces in our everydays. I was out walking on the breakwater in our lovely harbor here in the city of Victoria a few mornings ago, and the sunlight was dancing on the ripples of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. It was like a choreographed kind of dance going on, but it was so big. It was all over the place. Thousands of little sunlight dancers. And the otters were frolicking in the kelp bed at kind of my feet, and even the screechy gulls soared in silence. It was as if I had stepped into a space of silence, a sacred space of quiet. I'm getting all my S's mixed up. A sacred space of quiet, a space of awe. It was so quiet that it was almost deafening. Have you ever had that experience? It was as if the curtains had been drawn back and I had entered a different realm of quiet, of depth, of size, of vibrancy. And that words would have somehow desecrated that point. So even in my mind, the thoughts weren't real thoughts. It was more an embrace of the dancing sunlight. And maybe more that it embraced me. I was captivated by the power in that moment, in that space. And I found myself breathing in big gulps of silence because it was sacred, it was holy. It was a silencing awe. And it was as if the whole spiritual world of majesty and wonder was startlingly close to my material, physical world standing on the breakwater. It was a thin space, as the Quakers and Celts would say, between that spiritual world and my physical world coming together. A thin space. That dancing sunlight brought back to mind other times when sacred silence has grabbed hold of my soul. In my late teens, our church group often went to the town of Jasper and the Canadian Rockies, and we would climb Mount Edith Cavell. It is a mountain about 3,500 meters, or about 11,000 feet. So not a gigantic one, but a sizable one. And I still have body memory of the quality of the silence as we stood on the top of Mount Edith Cavell. The quality of silence was so loud, so beautiful. It had such depth to it. I can kind of hear it as I'm talking about it. It was a strong silence of beauty, of wonder, of awe, of majesty of our created world. And it is imprinted as a body memory within me. Another thin space of that spiritual realm now inside my body. I was breathing in something of the holy, hearing something of a sacred, majestic song of praise that took my breath away. And it seemed to transfuse my breath with a touch of eternal breath. A very thin space for me. For me, sacred spaces and sacred space encounters don't just happen in outdoor natural places, although that happens more easily. But on many occasions over the years, as I have counseled people and worked on spiritual integration with them, I have experienced times with individuals when our talking, our listening, our working space suddenly became a sacred space. It was like this sudden infusion of the presence of our holy God. Wow, like God showed up. A few weeks ago, I was in a conversation with a beautiful woman when I was suddenly aware that God had shown up in that aha moment sort of way. And it caused both of us to kind of suck in our breath and be quiet. We weren't expecting it. We hadn't asked for it. God showed up. And we were quiet. Words were too small. Words were inappropriate, it seemed. And we both knew that something had just happened for her. And in an instant, this presence of holiness, this presence of God for her arrived. And it included in all at the same time revelation and insight and understanding and hope. It just exploded within her. And it stopped both of us short. Silence. A holy silence, a sacred silence. It was as if someone had just entered our meeting space, had entered our minds, our hearts, and our spirits, and surprised us. And again, once again, like a curtain had been drawn back, and we had been transported into something so big, so vibrant, where words were totally inadequate. Because words, sentences would diminish, restrict what was being communicated in so many dimensions, in so many areas, in so many ways, all at the same time, that the words might even steal from that sacred moment. And in that moment with that woman, I knew that this was one of those holy sacred moments of encounter between God, the Holy One, and the woman I was talking with. I knew this was a moment of precious, precious sacred intimacy between her and God. And I knew it was time for me to leave God and her in that space and to get out of that, to leave her in that space of awe and wonder and holiness. So I left the conversation. I hung up, telling her what I was doing, of course, and left her in God's good care. It was God's gift to her. Now, I got to share in that moment that was sacred. I'm still feeling the wonder, the warmth, the awe of that sacredness. It's like a light summer scarf draped across my shoulders. For her, that sacred moment wasn't just a passing flash in the pan. It had impact. It will have permanence in her. The following days were different for her. Something had changed, had altered within her. A holy presence, a quiet confidence to live out her life. Something different. Kind of that sacred space of holy encounter impacted her and how she was living and how she was going to move on and move forward. It was one of those thin spaces of the Holy One meeting her, a thin space of a close encounter of intimacy. As I've been reflecting on that, I can't help but think about the experience that Peter, James, and John had on a high mountain with Jesus in Matthew chapter 17. Jesus takes them up there to be alone, to pray, and something happened. Jesus was transfigured into a quality of dazzling sunlight, water dancing light. And he was talking with two dead guys, Moses and Elijah. What are we going to do with that one? Well, that's a thin space if ever there was one. And dear Peter, I so identify with Peter. In fear, he blurts out right into Jesus' conversations with the living dead guys. And he says, okay, let's build a memorial. Let's build 3 memorials. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. What was Peter thinking? Well, he wasn't. He was experiencing a thin space that overwhelmed him. And what did he do? Well, he did what he usually did. He took charge. And then a voice, a booming, deep voice, boomed out from heaven and interrupted Peter's conversation and his words. Whoa. The voice says, "This is my son whom I love. This is my Jesus." Period. Then listen to him, exclamation mark. And at that, the disciples fell face down to the ground, terrified. Pretty good response, pretty accurate, pretty helpful. It was a response to holiness, to sacredness, to something that is so overwhelming and powerful. And they're face down until Jesus touches them and says, "Don't be afraid." And they move out of that sacred, thin space into their ordinariness, into their ordinary everyday, like we do, carrying forward a life-changing experience as body, mind, spirit has memory of that, a shaping, formational, transformational memory of that. A bit like Mount Edith Cavell for me. I think I am learning to look for those thin space moments that release awe-full worship and at times mildly terrifying, flatten my face awe. Those sacred moments that are woven into our everydays. And like Peter, I'm learning to stop, to listen, to look, to be alert to, and even to receive the presence of the holy in sacred, everyday moments. So let's look for those thin, sacred spaces in our lives. Amen.